Welcome everyone to the Healing Connections podcast. I'm your host, Emmy Vadnais, and today we are talking about consciousness and healing with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, who is host and producer of the new Thinking Aloud channel on YouTube. He is author of The Roots of Consciousness, Psi Development Systems, and the PK Man. He is a recipient of the only doctoral diploma in parapsychology ever awarded by an accredited university at the University of California, Berkeley in 1980. Between 1986 and 2002, he hosted and co-produced the original Thinking Aloud public television series. He is also past president of the nonprofit Intuition Network, an organization dedicated to creating a world in which all people are encouraged to cultivate and apply their inner intuitive abilities. Lovely. Welcome, Jeffrey Mishlove. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Emmy.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to speak with you is that I've really admired you and your show for a number of years, and you have talked to so many thought leaders in topics ranging from science, spirituality, healing, philosophy, parapsychology, which I know is near and dear to you, which maybe you could also help define what parapsychology is. And I was just curious, what was the impetus for you creating this show, Thinking Aloud, which, by the way, for those of you who are listening, is now reprised on YouTube and under New Thinking Aloud.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. And actually, there's a fascinating story behind how I got involved in the media. It goes all the way back to probably a time before you were born, I'm guessing, in 1972. At that time, I was a graduate student at Berkeley in the field of criminology. I was doing field work at San Quentin Prison in the psychiatric unit, doing group therapy with murderers and rapists. But my heart wasn't really in it. I did get a master's degree in criminology, but I wanted to switch from studying the negative forms of human deviance to positive forms of human deviance, like healing, intuition, creativity, psychic functioning. And at the time, there was no way at the University of California to do that. You could study psychopathology and crime all you wanted, but the positive side, there just were no programs. And I agonized about this for months. One day, I knew that the answer was going to come to me in a dream. And I just knew that. I went to bed knowing I was going to have a dream that night. And I did. I had this dream, and when I woke up from the dream, I thought, wow, I have the answer now. But I had no clue as to what the answer really was. So I actually acted out the dream. And in this dream, I was visiting some friends of mine in Berkeley, California, where I lived. I knocked on the door of their apartment, and nobody answered. And in the dream, I found their key, let myself into the apartment, walked into their living room, and there in the middle of the living room floor was a magazine. And I picked it up, and in the dream, I was paging through it. It was called EYE. And at that moment, I woke up and I thought, whoa, I have the answer. So I actually got up at 7 in the morning, put on my tennis shoes, ran across town 5 miles, came to this apartment where my friends lived, knocked on the door, and nobody was home, as I had dreamt. And in fact, I knew where they kept the key. So under the doormat, and I let myself in, went into the living room. Right there in the middle of the living room was a magazine. It wasn't called I, but it was very close. It was called Focus. And that magazine literally brought focus to my life. It was the magazine of listener-sponsored radio and television in the San Francisco Bay Area where I live, KQED. And at that moment, I made a decision. At the time, I didn't own a radio or a TV. I didn't even believe in them. I was like a long-haired hippie, and I thought that electronic communication is all phony baloney and only face-to-face human contact really mattered. But I changed my mind. I went over to the Pacifica radio station in Berkeley, nonprofit, listener sponsored, and I said, I'm here to volunteer. And even though I had my master's degree by then, they said, well, you can sit at the desk here, and when you hear the doorbell ring, you press this buzzer to let people in. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. I'm happy to do it, anything. And within 3 weeks, I had produced a radio program, and they gave me my own show every week, twice a week, Tuesday and Thursdays at noon, called The Mind's Ear. And I suddenly found myself sitting across a table with world-class experts, everyone who was writing a book about consciousness, passing through the San Francisco Bay Area. So I all of a sudden was plugged in. I had this enormous resource, and that is what actually gave me the confidence to create my own individual interdisciplinary doctoral program at Berkeley in parapsychology. So I felt like I was guided. And I can tell you this, the message in all of that for me is that when you decide that you're going to become the best version of yourself, to achieve, your highest aspirations, the universe will reach out to support you and help you.
Wow, what a wonderful story. And it really is an example of how you can listen to your own intuition to, like you say, connect with, well, there's different theories on what we're connecting with, our true self, our higher self, the collective consciousness. And that's what I'd love to ask you about as we go on, is your thoughts on some of these things. So you had your own radio show, then you started actively studying and working towards your doctorate around that time. Is that what happened?
That's right. That's
okay.
how
And then you created a parapsychology. Did you create your own program then at the time?
Yes, that's why I'm the only person in the world to have a doctoral diploma from an accredited university that actually says parapsychology, because I was the only one in the program. I designed it just for me. They had a provision at Berkeley back then that if you're a graduate student in good standing, which I was, and you want to do a dissertation on a topic that no department is willing to sponsor, but that you can find 3 different professors from different departments who are all willing to sponsor you, then you can create your own unique individual program. So that's what I did.
Oh my gosh. And could you share with us what parapsychology is, and also why is it that there aren't other people who have this advanced degree in this topic?
Well, first of all, parapsychology is the scientific study of extrasensory perception, which you can break that down to include telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, retrocognition, psychokinesis or mind over matter, which could also include healing, and also the question of survival of consciousness after death and reincarnation. So there are actually hundreds of people who do research in parapsychology. The Parapsychological Association, of which I'm a member, has like 400 members. I just happen to have a unique doctoral diploma that actually says parapsychology. The other members, and many of whom are more active than I am as researchers, they get their degrees in other fields, in psychology and philosophy, and even pharmacology, toxicology, physics, education. There are many avenues by which people approach parapsychological research, but I think I do have a unique perspective in that I really conceive of parapsychology as a discipline with a history that goes back all the way to ancient times.
Yes, and you wrote this amazing book that truly is. It's the roots of consciousness. It's the classic encyclopedia of consciousness studies, revised and expanded. And I think this was this updated in...
Well, let's see, the edition that you're holding there, that's actually the third edition of the book. It goes back sometime into the 1980s or 1990s. The original edition was 1975, and I wrote it while I was still a graduate student. It was not even my dissertation. It was the equivalent of, to show my professors that I was ready to begin to write a dissertation, that I had mastered an overview of the relevant literature of the field. So I wrote that book long ago for that purpose.
Yeah, it really is incredibly thorough, and I am really blown away with how in depth you go into all of these various topics, shamanistic traditions, all the way back to ancient Greek, and really looking at how we can connect with our own consciousness and how it really does, it seems to dovetail into, that's probably why you've been interviewing so many people with so many seemingly different, right? Seemingly different studies of philosophy and health and science and so forth, that our consciousness, and it seems to be coming to be a bit of a consensus, would you say, that consciousness is fundamental or elemental, and that it gives rise to all of our other experiences. And in the work that I do as a professional healthcare practitioner an intuitive healer myself, it seems that the more I go on in time, that the more that consciousness really seems to be at the core of what is important, even if somebody like myself or a practitioner is doing something to help strengthen the body or do some types of body work or dietary or nutrition, that yes, those biochemical changes are important and we have that dimension of healing that's necessary, but that tapping into consciousness can really go further into which even some leaders in healthcare talk about the placebo effect, which is the meaning and the purpose response. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this and what you've discovered in your time of writing such a thorough, truly encyclopedia, all the hundreds. Would you say, how many interviews have you even done now?
Well over 1,000.
Yes. Yes. And what have you, in the time that you were a graduate student, had your radio show, and then, talked with more people in California, what have you discovered or learned in all this time that's spanned many decades now?
Well, of course, in the space of an hour, it would be hard to even summarize all of that. It becomes a lifelong passion. And the more you get into the field, the more nuances and subtleties and complexities there are. And at the same time, it's almost as if I feel the more I know, the less I know in a funny way. I begin to realize how much I don't know, actually. So it's not as if I can give you all sorts of pronouncements about this is the way it is, because I'm still just as in awe and mystified by the wonderful phenomena as I've ever been, to be honest. I don't think we have any final answers. I'm not sure we ever will have final answers, but it's an incredible journey for anybody who wants to be on the path. And actually, I think for me, and probably for many people, it's not even about wanting to be on the path. It's as if the path wants you and you get recruited.
Right, right. Yeah, I have felt that way in my life too, that there does seem to be an element of connecting with our own gifts and passions that are there that we just naturally gravitate toward. So yeah, if you have any experiences or insights that as we continue talking that stand out for you, certainly do share. I'm curious, how would you define consciousness?
That's a good one. Because we use the word in different ways at different times. Like normally when I talk about consciousness, I'm talking about my consciousness, which means I'm aware, I'm having experiences. I'm not just a robot that, there's something going on inside of me. It feels like it's on the inside, but maybe I'm on the inside of it in a way. But then there's a larger sense of consciousness, well beyond the personal consciousness, that, the research in parapsychology shows that the human mind can reach out in time and in space and obtain accurate information from very, very distant places. And it suggests that we're all embedded in a kind of larger, more impersonal consciousness. Some people call it spirit. Some people would even say the Holy Spirit, that we're all embedded in. And that, I don't want to put it in religious terms necessarily, but I do have, I guess, for myself, I have a Jewish background, but I would call myself a secular person. And I think we live in an era today where there's an upsweep of what you could call secular spirituality, people who have a very strong sense of a spiritual connection, but no particular involvement with organized religions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, and certainly everyone has their own consciousness perspective probably on consciousness and spirituality and religion. And I really appreciate what you say about that, there is no final answer, and that may be the beauty of what's happening. I'm currently studying the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, and one of the fundamental components that I am learning is that consciousness seems to be creating itself. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you resonate with or have a similar viewpoint on?
Yeah, the Buddhists talk about mutually arising conditions, that consciousness can't exist all by itself. It has to have a subject, it has to have an object. It's as if the universe is creating us as a way of discovering itself.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. And so what have you discovered or learned, or what are your thoughts on how consciousness can affect health, healing, well-being, recovery? Now, I certainly understand that we're all going to pass of something from this particular incarnation and go to wherever we go after here, or some believe that that's it. So I understand that, that as far as prevention, that at a certain point, something is going to take us, but so that we can live our best lives from that place of love and joy and with meaning and purpose, with our own gifts that we can bring.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, whether you feel healthy or sick is all about consciousness. Ultimately, that's your experience of yourself. And there's a kind of irony involved, and that is that you might be a person who is physically in terrible, terrible shape, but spiritually you might be highly evolved. And for example, I'm about to do an interview on Saint Joseph of Cupertino, who was a 17th century friar in Italy, about whom there were many reports, hundreds of reports of levitation. Eyewitnesses saw him levitate on numerous occasions over a period of 30 years, and he would go into ecstatic raptures. Highly evolved being spiritually, very selfless. He hardly ate, but he didn't care about his body. He took no care of it at all. As I say, he hardly ate. He was praying on his knees so much that his knees became infected. His body was full of open sores. It smelled badly. And yet it seemed as if he was highly evolved. So I would say this. Sometimes, and this is a real paradox, but I've talked to many people about this, people who have suffered terrible illnesses, for example. Sometimes they would say, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing, because there was so much growth, so much learning for them in the process of getting ill and then discovering how to rebuild their lives in the face of such a tragedy. There are people today who are very popular out on the public speaking circuit and are confined to a wheelchair, and people who've been through fires and automobile accidents and motorcycle accidents and horrendous things. And if you listen carefully to their story, they'll tell you that they learned so much from that it was worth it. Now, I'm not such a person. I get very squeamish, about little things. But I would say this overall, that how you manifest in the world, your physical body, the things that you surround yourself with, the people who are in your life, are all reflections of your consciousness.
So do you feel, so this is an interesting question, do you feel that what we think we manifest?
In general, yes. I don't want to make it a hard and fast rule, because after all, we all live in this larger universe. And you talk about healing. I feel that everybody who's on a spiritual path discovers sooner or later that part of being on that path is that you have the capacity to send and to direct healing thoughts. And so you want to, to me, whenever I find that I have nothing better to do, like if I'm in bed about to fall asleep, or if I'm bored for any reason, I will sit and meditate or lie down and meditate and just try to send healing wherever I think it's needed. And of course, starting with myself, moving out, to members of my household and to relatives and friends, and then maybe people I know professionally, or people who are viewers of the New Thinking Aloud video channel. But ultimately, I've reached a point where I think I can actually try to send healing to the entire universe. Now, maybe it's a total fantasy on my part, who knows? But it feels like I don't want to just, direct healing to myself at the expense of other aspects of the universe. I sometimes think to myself that, well, our nation could use healing, the planet could use healing, and why does the planet need healing in the first place? Maybe it's something about the whole universe.
Yeah, excellent point. This is why I'm so grateful to speak with you. Right, because maybe the healing is consciousness evolving in general.
And as you started to point out, that consciousness is the basis of everything, then, my experience of the whole universe's experience is mediated by my consciousness. But there's a sense in which my little ego consciousness at some deep, subtle level touches the entire universe. So maybe, a simple healing thought, I guess the best way to put it is it can't hurt.
Right. And I found, like you're saying, in my own life personally now, I've worked with thousands of people in healthcare, and I'll just speak from my own experience, but I've certainly seen this with folks I've worked with as well, that, as you pointed out, when people have we'll just go to an extreme, a crisis situation like an accident or a very significant loss of some kind that was seemingly not created by the individual, and it's up for debate on how those things happen, that in my experience and the folks who I've worked with, now they probably are drawn to me for a reason. I also believe that it is an opportunity to really dig deep into oneself, and that a person's worldview, beliefs, part of themselves. There's a saying, a broken heart is an open heart, or, where there's the crack, that's where the light can shine in or shine out. And I certainly have seen that to be the case, that it is an opportunity for a person then to maybe discover other things about themselves. Now, certainly I don't want, quote, bad things to happen to people. However, in certain cases, like you were mentioning, that when some of those things happen, there does tend to be For example, when I worked, let's say, in the ICUs and somebody's on the brink of, are they going to stay in this life or are they going to pass? And the family coming together and the tremendous amount of love and connectedness that can happen in those moments that wouldn't have otherwise happened. Now, I'm not suggesting that people have to have those experiences to come together, but it does seem in certain cases that certain situations arise for a person to have these openings maybe into other dimensions of their own consciousness.
Well, I think culturally speaking, we live in a culture that is by and large afraid of death, and death is considered a bad thing, and we don't even want to talk about it. I've known very highly evolved people who just, one of my mentors, Arthur Young, died at the age of 90, and he was ill towards the end, but he would never talk about death, and tried to fight it the whole time, and, which is fine. There's no reason that people have to surrender to death, but sometimes it is a good thing. Sometimes it's a good thing to stop fighting and to just surrender to what's ever happening. And it's a delicate thing for a healer. When you're working with a patient, when do you reach that time where instead of trying to fight off the illness, you say it's time to let go? As they say, let go and let God.
Yes. And there is a fear, like you mentioned, in our culture. In fact, I think isn't it public speaking is the number one fear, and I think fear of death is the second one. Here you and I are doing a form of public speaking together. So I think that really is perhaps a core issue for people, is that fear of death. In fact, isn't it the Tibetan Book of Dead? And I mean, there's all these different writings around preparing for this. And I know people have their own beliefs of preparing for that. So, and absolutely. And that's why I'm such a fan of helping people with meditation, guided imagery, very energy healing, various forms. Dr. Benson he's coined the term the relaxation response. So any method that helps a person get into that state of consciousness, to me, feels very much like a sweet spot, that in that moment, and I believe it was Dean Radin who even mentioned that that's the state of gnosis, that from that state, this is where we can tap into our own inner knowing that can guide us. And so that we can have more peace. We get to have physiologically, our blood pressure comes down, our heart rate comes down. We can go into a more homeostatic balance where our immune system can function better. And so it does seem that is a big component for being able to tap into also what I was talking with Dr. Wayne Jonas recently, a physician, about that can help a person connect also with their meaning and belief or expectation response, often known as the placebo. And so it seems that, and that's what I'm sort of curious about with your experiences, is how important do you feel it is for a person to connect with their own inner wisdom and intuition, and how much do you believe we can manifest what we would like to create? Obviously it should, there's kind of that line of, is it in alignment with what's for our highest good and greatest joy? I found that in my life, that we can, I want to have this, very materialistic $100,000 car, but for a lot of people that doesn't manifest. Or I really want my cancer to go away, and sometimes it does for people and sometimes it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose you could say we all have our own individual karma. Everybody is on a unique path, and so there isn't going to be one prescription that's going to be right for everybody. For some people, getting that Maserati is exactly what they need to do, and they know it. And for other people, it's absolutely the last thing in the world that is important to them. But I will say this about inner knowing. Inner knowing is very good. I encourage everybody to cultivate their intuition. That's what the Intuition Network, of which I was president for many years, does. But also, we can learn a lot from science. That's why I'm a parapsychologist. It's a scientific discipline, and studying parapsychology can provide enormous insights into this whole very important question of an afterlife, because we now have an extensive database of young children who start to talk about their past lives as soon as they can speak. And many times researchers will get on the case and collect that data from the young child and actually locate the family where the previous lifetime was and identify it. And there's now a database of over, I believe the number is over 1,200 cases of young children remembering past lives where researchers have been able to actually identify the past life individual and create matches. And in some of those cases, we now find that the death wounds of the previous person correspond to birthmarks of the young children. So we can see continuity from lifetime to lifetime. And with a database of that many cases, you can begin to look at psychological factors and begin to explore questions like, what is the space, the interval between lifetimes like? There's also an enormous amount of data coming in from near-death experiences and from the study of mediumship. Now, I don't think any of this gives us definitive proof about the afterlife, but what it does do is it creates a picture. It begins to create a lot of data that is very suggestive of a picture, and the picture is simply that your consciousness is much larger than your brain, much larger than your physical body. It's probably more accurate to say that your brain and your body are embedded within consciousness than to say that your consciousness is embedded within your brain.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you bring all of that up, because these are all the big questions that I think many people are searching for. Some people probably don't think about it too much, but I think a lot of people, I mean, this is why there are religions and specific spiritual practices and so forth. You know, you mentioned now you have a doctorate in parapsychology. It seems that parapsychology is, well, let me ask you this. What do you feel the state of parapsychology is as a discipline or a study now as compared to when you began all this?
Well, back in the 1970s, when I started my doctoral program in parapsychology, I was very optimistic. It looked like it was a revolution about to happen, about to change society. And the intriguing thing is my friend, Jacques Vallée, at that time was working at SRI International, where they were doing very important research on remote viewing, and also they were building the internet. It was at that time called the ARPANET. And he said these two things each have potential to revolutionize society. But now we can look back 45 years later and say, well, yes, the internet did. The internet revolutionized society. It will never be the same again. But parapsychology has yet to achieve that. I mean, I got a doctoral degree in 1980. That's 38 years ago. And it's still the only one. So I feel lonely, and it's a big motivation for me to keep doing these videos, because I believe that this field will revolutionize our culture. It's just going to take a lot longer, because the philosophical, spiritual, psychological depths that are touched by the field of parapsychology are so profound that the change is going to take not decades, but hundreds of years, probably. And so the work that I do now with the New Thinking Aloud channel is to help prepare the way for that, especially for people who themselves would like to get the kind of education I managed to give myself. So I try to interview, the most authoritative people I can and make that available to everybody.
Yes, yes. Well, and it's interesting too, because it seems that a lot more people are practicing yoga, meditation. That's become a lot more mainstream. So whether it's called parapsychology or not, it does seem that here, at least in the United States, where we are, that certainly a lot of people enter into yoga for fitness, but then as they practice it more, they start to discover through the meditation that there's a whole really lifestyle or discipline to it that can raise consciousness. And I'm certainly noticing that it does seem that that is shifting consciousness. And among the healthcare practitioners who I talk with, and I provide continuing education to healthcare practitioners, that there does seem to be a bump up of people being interested in consciousness and how the mind can affect all aspects of our lives. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, in fact, I remember back in the 1960s, Dr. Bernard Grad at McGill University in Montreal did what was the very first scientific experiments on psychic healing. He worked with mice, he worked with plants, and he had healers sending healing to the mice and plants, double-blind studies, and got significant results. And people in the parapsychology community at that time were amazed because they said, oh, we thought it was all placebo effect, all psychological, but now we have experimental evidence that there's something else going on. You could call it psychokinetic healing or maybe telepathic healing. It's hard to say for sure what the mechanism is, but that was the very first scientific evidence about 50 years ago. And now you have, as you point out, yoga studios on practically every street corner in cities like Minneapolis. And my mother became a yoga teacher in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And you have an enormous public awakening that's going on now. The problem is that the mainstream institutions, our universities, the organizations that fund research, the business community is still the slowest ones and to get on board with this. And in fact, you could call these people the cultural gatekeepers. Many of them are actively working to suppress this information because of several concerns. Some people are concerned about fraud. Some people are concerned about introducing religion into it, or some people think it could be the work of the devil. And so there are all of these attitudes, and they need to be respected. But I think ultimately what's going to make the difference in the long run is the enormous body of scientific evidence, because we're at a point now where I think there are probably thousands of experiments, scientific studies validating all of this work on healing.
Yeah. Well, there definitely is a, this I think is again a core component for us in all of our consciousnesses is fear. And so I'm wondering do you think maybe, I mean, certainly we're seeing evidence of it happening. I know in the work that I'm doing, there certainly is a lot more research, certainly with meditation, which directly is working with consciousness, the mind, body, spirit connection, that actually even for those who want the hard neurological scientific data shows changes in the brain structures that can benefit people's cognition and memory and decrease stress and symptoms of trauma and all of this. So it is happening is what we're saying. Is there anything else that you feel, what else do you think might be is there anything else you think might be affecting resistance, or what else do you think could continue it to evolve more quickly? Because I see it benefit myself and all the people I share this with tremendously, for those who are interested in learning more about it.
Well, you brought up the notion of fear. And I do think it's very important. We have to appreciate that even here in the United States, it's only a little over 200 years since witches were burned at the stake, literally. And of course, in Europe, hundreds of thousands of women were tortured or burned at the stake because of witchcraft. And that's still alive in our culture. In Africa today, they're still punishing witches. And I can tell you this, in England, the last person to go to prison for witchcraft was in 1942. Oh, wow. As a matter of fact, a spirit medium who was a very effective spirit medium, and the British decided to put her into prison because she was going into trance and providing information about ships that had been sunk in warfare. And they were concerned that the enemy might learn about her information and use it for strategic advantage. But this fear of witchcraft is still kind of bubbling up in the subconscious of many people, especially people who cling to traditional religions.
And yet in a lot of mainstream religions, that is a core feature. There's prophecy.
Yes.
Gift of the spirit, communicating with
Yep.
another dimension.
As long as it's under the control of the spiritual authorities. As soon as it's not under their control, then it becomes evil and demonic. So there's a political aspect to all of this, but also a deep psychological aspect. And if you look at some of the hardcore skeptics, the ones, and there are armies of them out there, like rationalist Boy Scouts who want to snuff what they call the rising tide of superstition. And it's really just a new gloss over this whole fear of evil and demons and witchcraft, only now they say, oh, it's superstition. But many of the people who pride themselves on being rational, logical people, but who oppose all of this research, they believe in their version of rationality and logic with the same fervor that the religious fundamentalists hold their beliefs. So those are the main two forces that are suppressing what you could call the movement. The sociologist Paul Ray calls them the cultural creatives, people who are engaged in, there are two wings of the cultural creatives. One is the spiritual wing, and the other is the wing of social activism. And it's actually the single largest and fastest growing group in our culture.
Oh my goodness. So what do you feel will help for those who would benefit? I mean, clearly those who are listening to this now have an interest in this, but for those who might be on the fence or really have fear of it, is there anything that you think could help move it forward in our culture?
Well, it takes inner work. And one of the first things that people learn to do when they begin to look inside of themselves is to confront their fears, because usually you find, if you're having a dream and you're being chased by a monster in your dream, one of the first things, the best ways to deal with that, if it's like a recurring nightmare, is to turn around and confront the monster. Now, it's different for different people, as I mentioned earlier.
Done, right?
We all have our own particular karma. For some people, the monsters vanish right away as soon as you confront them. For other people, they might get stronger. And you may have to battle your inner demons for a long time, because ultimately, I think what happens on the spiritual path is that we learn that the monsters that we're confronting are ourselves. As Pogo once said, we have found the enemy and it is us.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So it also seems that, and when you were starting out, did you have an interest in parapsychology being taught more at a younger age and also at the university level? Because it certainly is something that I would love to see. Now, I am a big fan of logic as well. I really value that. I also would love to see intuition and meditation and things of these natures taught at a younger age, because of the hard scientific research and how it can even help physical health and also the mental well-being as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychiatrist, said there are four primary functions of the human consciousness: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. And we live in a culture, I would say, where thinking and sensation and logic are kind of dominant, and feeling and intuition are subservient. So we're out of balance. And I think all across our culture, it would be healthy to have a balance where all four of these functions are given equal prominence, and particularly intuition. I think is the one that gets left out. That's why the Intuition Network has been so important to me.
Yeah, and intuition is a beautiful process for anyone who's interested in developing that to, certainly seek out a teacher, or if you have any suggestions, Jeffrey, and to maybe even take up meditation. But I think exactly your point around when we do begin to meditate or go within or explore within, we do find those parts of ourselves that are uncomfortable, and that as we work with those, our intuition can develop more, and we can have these other ways of knowing and these other beautiful experiences that can assist us and guide us going forward. What would you suggest for those who would like to capitalize on their consciousness for a happier, joyful life, for more harmony with themselves and relationships with others, health, well-being, maybe recovery of disease, or learning to have that wellness in that peaceful state if they are suffering from some type of disease or illness?
I did have the privilege of interviewing Joseph Campbell many years ago, and I asked him that question, and he said, follow your bliss.
Yes.
It's going to be different for everybody. Some people, it might be skydiving. For some people, it might be hiking. For other people, meditation or yoga or psychotherapy or getting involved in a 12-step program. Or becoming an avid fan of the New Thinking Aloud video channel or your program. All of those things, each person is going to have to find it for themselves. If I had to say one thing that probably everybody should try, it's meditation. But really, there are a lot of individual differences.
Sure. Or even being in nature. I mean, that can be very powerful. And like you said, follow your bliss. I mean, that is so right on. And also that is really does correlate to the health research out there around engaging in activities that provide meaning and purpose for you, really connecting what is meaningful and purposeful activities for you in your life, because that can help bring in, like you were mentioning earlier, that positive psychology, those positive psychological states that can connect us to our own heart, soul, consciousness, and wisdom. And in a lot of cases, really overcome those areas or give us that positive state or higher vibration to be able to work with maybe some of those areas that do, tend to have fear, or that can provoke fear within ourselves, so that we can learn to be with that, accept it, embrace it, or even overcome it as well. So thank you so much. That was fabulous. You got to interview him. I just read one of his main books this summer, preparing for a book that I'm writing on intuition. And so I just love that. We just have a few minutes left. Is there anything you would like to share around any particular, you just mentioned it with Joseph Campbell, but is there anything else that relevant to this conversation around consciousness and healing from that you would like to share from your experiences communicating with so many wise beings over the years?
Well, thank you for that, Emmy. Let me say this, because I did have a thought passing through my mind just as I said, follow your bliss. There's some people who are going to say, well, that's fine for you. You are part of the elite. Look, you're healthy, you're happy. You can follow your bliss, but what about me? I can hardly put food on the table. I've got oppression. I live in a culture where everybody is picking on me for some reason. I
only make so much dollars per hour, which is a very real experience for people.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who have lost their homes. There are homeless people, tens of thousands of homeless people in almost every major American city. To tell them follow your bliss may seem like very shallow advice, but I could say this. Maybe it's not appropriate for everybody to follow their bliss, but what you can do, even in the most extreme situations, there's probably opportunities for you to be of service and help and kindness to other people. And just focus on someone else and what their needs are, and see if you can be a little helpful to them. If you can't follow your bliss, being good, doing good in the world will always generate dividends for people.
Well said. And actually, the research around the meaning and purpose response is very much around that. It is what is meaningful, purposeful for you, but that can also be a benefit or of service to others. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Anything else you want to share about why you feel we're here, what our purpose is, or where we might go when we leave this earth? Just you personally.
Oh, you know, those are things that are very hard to put into words. It'd be nice if I could say something short and pithy and snappy, like follow your bliss, but uh, ultimately it's a mystery. You know, existence itself is a huge mystery. Why anything exists? Why do we have something rather than nothing? And I think, you know, being on a spiritual path just means kind of moving into that mystery and letting the wonder of it all kind of guide you.
Yes, yes, the great mystery, and hopefully moving toward dancing in the great mystery. So
Good idea.
you and I share a common interest with intuition, and I know that you were the past president of the Intuition Network. Could you share a little bit more about what that is, and if anybody's anything you might suggest for those who might be interested in developing their intuition more?
Well, the Intuition Network was quite active for many years. We received a lot of funding at one time from a foundation where you are in Minnesota. But at this point, what it really entails is for people who are professionals in the field of intuition as researchers, writers, media personalities, healers, readers, consultants, therapists, people who are working professionally in the field of intuition. It can be a lonely profession at times. So we provide opportunities for mutual support and networking amongst professionals. And for any of your viewers, if they're interested in learning more about it, you could go on Facebook. We have a Facebook group called In Presence. INPRESENCE, to be, in other words, present to the moment. And if you look up that Facebook group, it's for people who are functioning professionally as as intuition professionals. So that would be a starter. We have other more private groups than that one, but that sort of would be a public entree into networking with other people who are professionally committed to this field.
Wonderful. So you have your new Thinking Aloud, which is a reprisal of the Thinking Aloud from the public television series. What are you continuing to interview people, or what is your focus now, or what are you hoping to continue to achieve or bring to the world as you go forward? Or has your mission really been the same here for many years, which is really beautiful, and I hope everybody does check out your channel.
Well, you know, I was guided, as I mentioned, in 1972 by a dream to begin this work in the media, and I'm still doing it. I put up 3 interviews a week these days, and earlier this year I did over 150 monologues that I posted to the New Thinking Aloud channel. So I intend to keep going with it as long as I can. We now are approaching 40,000 subscribers to the YouTube channel, and my goal is to put, there's so much valuable information out there. My field of parapsychology is almost 150 years old. The Society for Psychical Research in England, the first professional organization, was founded in 1882. There's a vast body of knowledge and an incredible amount of research and philosophy available to people, and it's being frankly ignored for the most part in our educational system, especially in our universities. So I just want to keep putting as much of it out there of the highest quality for the whole public, available to people at no cost to them. So that's what I'm about.
And we are so grateful. I am so grateful for all that you're doing, and I'm grateful that you're continuing to do it. Do check out the new Thinking Aloud. And I really want to just come back to and come full circle here with our discussion today is that you mentioned at the beginning that you had this image in your dream of the eye or the magazine, EYE, and then it was focus in real life, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because the studies around that I've been doing, and I would imagine you have too, with intuition or meditation or consciousness and how it can help us in our lives, is that it might be a good exercise for all of us to consider where should we put our focus, or where can we get that clarity with our eye? What in our life wants to, what can give us more meaning and purpose, or how can we connect with that? How can we be of more service to others, and to maybe focus on what might have spoken to you in our conversation here today as you go forward? Because I think that as far as consciousness, it does seem that there's a saying, I don't know who said it, but energy flows where attention goes. And so that what we put our eyes on, our inner mind's eye, our physical eye, and what we focus on, that we can really generate a lot of energy and movement around that. And so I invite all of you to consider that. Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, thank you so much for your time together with me today. I'm very honored, and I look forward to more wonderful information you continue to put out.
Thank you very much, Emmy. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye for now and be well.